Howdy, Worship Initiative friends. Welcome to a podcast with the one and only Jacob Lackey.
Wow.
Do you feel honored to be here?
Wow. No, I feel honored by your introduction.
My name is Nathan, and we are here talking about just some audio things. Jacob's been in our studio all week, really the last 2 days, but talking about introduction to audio in church world, and you're a master at that. You have been involved in some very big things from Passion to Breakaway, but also you've trained small churches, so we're grateful for you to be here. I think the way that we'll get rolling is this is going to be kind of a catch-all / grab bag of information, but really things that we couldn't quite slide into your content. So I have a running list, and it's more like, let's hit these things and see how it goes. Before we jump in, is there anything that you would like to address the audience with?
I'm excited about this. We've been talking for the last couple of days about hot takes or just different practicals that'll be really helpful that don't necessarily fit in a normal training content, but come up all the time when either I'm doing a training or just having conversations with other people that run sound.
The first topic we're going to jump into is something that everyone can hear, which is feedback. I'm just kidding. Okay, here's the question. What is feedback, and how do I avoid it?
Oh, yes. This is a good question. Feedback is when a frequency is looping. Basically, it's loud enough so that it's looping from the microphone through the speakers, back through the microphone, back through the speakers. So it's literally a loop. So you're hearing it increase, and it's usually at one specific frequency or a small range of frequencies. How to avoid it is a little bit more complicated. There's a few practical things. I would say, in general, if you set up for success and your room is set up for success and your stage is set up for success, you won't have to worry too much about feedback, and you can kind of focus on making each instrument or each input or each vocal sound really clean, and then it kind of does its job and keeps feedback from happening. So they kind of work together. It's not completely separate. I don't mix thinking my only goal is to make sure that it's not feeding back. Pastor's mic turns on, I hope it doesn't feed back. I think we want to get to a point where we have our mics placed in the right place, and we have our people, so like vocalists standing behind the speakers, our pastors standing behind the speakers, things like that can really help get us on the right track. But then that way we don't have to think about, is it going to feedback? Is it not going to feedback? I'm EQing to just try and keep feedback out. Because think about it, as we do that, we're modifying the original source sound. Mm-hmm. So if I pull out this band of EQ out of this mic and it didn't need it otherwise, but only because it's feeding back, then I'm actually affecting how that person's voice sounds overall. Yep. So I try to avoid as much as I can. There's certain circumstances that necessitate it. But in general, I'm not thinking, how do I just get rid of feedback? I'm thinking about, how do I shape the sound as a whole? And naturally, that kind of gets rid of those frequency ranges that tend to feedback.
Yep. If feedback is a loop, the quickest way to get rid of feedback is to cut the loop.
Yeah.
And generally, when I've experienced feedback, it has more to do with where the microphone is placed or where that person is standing than specific problems in the PA. So generally, make sure the PA is in front of the microphone. Like the speakers, there's nothing that can be heard by the person wearing the microphone from the speakers. Naturally, it's just reflecting back off the wall. Now, that does bring up things like floor wedges. Floor wedges can cause feedback, but generally think about cutting that loop. So putting the speakers in front of the microphone. One thing that I like to bring up is I've been to multiple churches, smaller churches, where they have some feedback problems. Maybe the PA is installed in such a way and their stage is in such a way where there's naturally going to be problems. And so they start making those EQ moves, cutting out feedback on individual inputs. I would advise against solving feedback with an EQ on an individual input. If you have to use EQ to solve feedback, I would place that on your main outs. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think generally, in an ideal world, you would have someone like an integrator or someone who set up the sound system who could professionally tune it, and they would tune it in a way that would accommodate for that. So I think that's ideal. But if you're in a circumstance where that's not a possibility, I do think maybe a couple of those bands or specific EQ ranges you could add into your sound system EQ to accommodate for that, especially if you are noticing, okay, on every single channel, I have to cut out this one frequency range. That I would for sure agree with that if you're always cutting out this frequency range on every channel, you could take that out by a few decibels on your main left and right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Feedback. Did it.
Let's go.
Next, hitting cues.
Yes.
I'm in service. someone's about to walk on stage, they start talking, I miss it. Oh no. What are some ways I could set my desk up that helps me to be prepared for success in hitting cues? And then what are some brain space, maybe notes? Like how do you manage all that?
Oh, that's a great question. This is something that I gave the example earlier in the series about most people are not going to leave a gathering and think, oh, the snare sounded so awesome, but they will notice if the pastor starts talking and their mic is not turned on. So it is really important. And I usually spend all my time during sound check and during the band rehearsal focusing on the band, how does the mix sound, all those things, to do as much of that legwork then so that during the actual service, during the gathering, I'm mostly focusing on who's leading, what are the lead parts, who's about to come up to talk, because all those things, depending on your service order, can be pretty complicated, and you really want to make sure that you're able to lock into those. And so I'm spending one of the tips that I do in terms of like practical things, the last 30 seconds of any song, my mind just automatically starts to think about what's the next song. So as the band's starting to come down towards the end of a song, my mind's already looking down at the sheet of paper, the planning center, looking at my phone, wherever the notes are about what's coming up, and thinking about, okay, who's leading the next song, who's about to come up on stage, so that I can move to that page wherever I need to find that fader, make sure it's ready so I can unmute it. And I'll go ahead and like put my hands on that so that as soon as the moment ends and I see that person on stage or that person's about to start leading, I can pull that into place.
Yeah. If you're a worship leader or pastor and it's relatively common for audio volunteers to be missing their cues, the first question I would ask you is, are you setting them up with clear instructions and documentation on what's happening in the service and when? I think there's also an audio volunteer piece as well, which is, what about my console? Are there ways that set me up for success when I have to move fast? What are some things that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll try to keep all the faders that I'm most often going to need to grab at a quick moment. So that's the vocals, headset mics or headset mic for the pastor, any handhelds like for announcements or anything like that, or hosting. I try to keep those all on the same page because then I'm living on that page most of the time. So if your console has different pages and you can move faders around and stuff like that, I try to keep those near the top. Or if you have a few different banks, so like different sections of faders, maybe keeping one of those just dedicated to that. That way you always have quick access, and I can kind of go based off of muscle memory to this spot and grab those faders and be ready to unmute it or move them around, rather than having to be like, okay, is it on page B? Oh no, page C. Okay, now I'm trying to get over there. I can't find it, but keeping it right there in front of you.
One thing that I do, I would love to know what your opinion is on this, but I never use mutes. I don't want to have to do two things to turn something on. I only use faders. So, especially for talking head mics, if I've dialed in my talking head mics to where I know unity is correct or near unity is correct and I'm used to the room, I won't ever use my mutes because I don't want to have to, I want to easily know if that mic is on or off, and I don't want to have to do two things. I don't want to have to turn a fader up and then unmute a button. So if you love mutes, maybe it's you're never touching a fader, but I don't love the sound of a mic just unmuting in the house and that just open mic popping in and out. So I don't ever use mutes. I only use the fader, and then I don't have to do two things. Do you do something similar?
I don't disagree with that though. I think that's a great idea. The only slight caveat is if your setup is that those mics go to the band unless they're muted. So just keeping in mind that. But assuming that that's not the way that it's configured, then that's a great process. I think that's awesome.
That's true. That's a good caveat there. Okay, we have now done hitting cues. Now
let's go.
Balanced mix. This is a very broad topic, but when you hear the word balanced mix, let's flip it. Let's do the shadow side. What isn't a balanced mix?
Yeah, an unbalanced mix would be something is jumping out. So that could be the vocals are way too loud and the band is missing. Usually that's not the case. Usually it's the reverse. The vocals are buried because the band is really loud, or maybe the electric guitars are screeching and everything else is hidden. Or I even would add a second kind of layer to that and say a balanced mix includes the energy that the band is giving off. So if it's a full song, I want it to feel full in the room.
Oh, interesting.
So there's something about that, and I don't know, this may be a little bit more touch and go, but I think that people and in my experience at least, it doesn't feel as loud if there's a little bit of low end supporting the volume. So sometimes people say, oh, it's too loud. Let me just cut out the bass. Let me cut out the subs. Let me do things like that. And I think because our ears are so used to hearing mixes that are balanced, any song you listen to on any service is going to have a balanced mix with low end and high end. If you cut out one of those, it actually makes the high end feel brighter. It makes it feel louder. So you can actually make the balance as a whole feel good and the mix as a whole feel not as loud by having a little bit of low end supporting the rest of the mix. And so the balance is having a good mix, just like you would have on any song that you listen to, of low end, mids, highs, so that nothing's standing out, but also nothing's missing.
Yeah. Our ears are most sensitive in that upper mids, highs area. And that is where a mix starts to feel intense if it's too loud. It's never the low end. Now there are some caveats, like, there's conversations about pacemakers or things like that. But a long time ago, I heard this analogy about a balanced mix, which is if I took a pin, like a pin that you would sew with, and put 5 pounds of pressure against my finger, that would hurt. Like a pinprick, it would pierce my, my hand, and it would hurt badly, really. If I took my hand and I put 50 pounds of pressure against my other hand, that doesn't hurt. It actually, even if I do like 20 pounds of pressure on maybe your shoulder or your arm, that can actually be comforting. So it's not necessarily how loud it is, but if it's more of a balanced mix, it could feel more like a warm hug and less like a pinprick.
Yes, I agree. and I think that bleeds a little bit into the like SPL, what volume should I run at? Which, to be clear, I think having the number of, hey, this is what we typically run at, this is what we feel good about with our church leadership, I think that's a great thing. But I will add that a lot of people miss the nuance of if you have a balanced mix, it may not actually feel as loud because the meter is showing you what the same frequency, typically the same frequency across all levels, but our ears don't hear in that same way.
Yep.
And so I care a little bit more about this almost like psychoacoustics of how does it feel? Does it actually feel loud? Is anyone complaining and saying, oh, it's really loud? And if they are, I want to ask questions to understand, where were you? What are you hearing? Is it a specific instrument? Kind of helping them process that too and helping me gather data. But typically, even if the number is the same, a really polished mix that is really careful around those higher frequencies that our ears are sensitive to, that is full and balanced, people don't really have any complaints about because it feels natural. So psychologically, it feels like a normal mix and it feels pleasant as opposed to a mix that's at 80 dBA but is like screeching and you're like, this is too loud, this is really painful. So the number is helpful as a reference, but also doesn't always take into account how balanced the mix is.
If you're asking yourself, how do I get a natural sounding balanced mix? Jacob just did a really great mixing tutorial. And as I was watching him do it, I was like, man, it really does sound very natural. Your approach is a very natural and soothing approach to a mix at the end. And so if you're wondering what that kind of nitty gritty nuts and bolts is, I would highly recommend checking out the mixing series that you did.
Thank you.
Okay. DCAs.
Ooh,
what's a DCA? Yes. Or a VCA if you're weird?
if that's what your console calls it, if you're weird. I don't actually know the acronym off the top of my head. Digitally controlled automation?
No, I think it's voltage control amplifier.
What's the D then?
And then it became, once they realized that there wasn't any electricity, they just changed it to digital. And so now it's a digital control. Yeah. Actually, Jerry, if you're willing to Google what DCA stands for, that would be helpful for us. If not, it's okay.
I mean, we're already here.
We're already here.
We've already broke the third wall.
What's a DCA?
Well, let me just wait till we can wrap up this part. I don't know if this is even a part.
Digitally controlled amplifier. Hey, I was right.
Okay, cool. So we can start with that.
Digitally controlled amplifier. Okay.
So the DCA, digitally controlled amplifier, doesn't really matter what the acronym is though, because basically what it is it's essentially taking a group of inputs and putting them in one place. So you can think of it from left to right. So you can take all your drums that are on your left side that you're mixing all the different channels. You have your kick, snare, all those things, and you're going to put that into a drums DCA. And that group of all of these inputs then is then going to put all of those together on one fader. So as the last step before it goes out to the speakers, it goes through this, and then this blocks it basically from hitting the speakers. You assign all those drums to this DCA, and then this DCA, if I move it up and down, it's going to affect the overall volume of the drums. And then I can also mute this DCA, and it'll mute all the drums together. What that does, I actually mix a lot on DCA. So I'll have a drums DCA, or drums and bass, electrics, acoustic, keys, vocals, and usually like vocal effects DCA. And that allows me, typically my workflow at least, is that I mix almost always on the inputs. So each of those individual channels during rehearsal, get the band sounding really good, how I like them there, and have all the DCAs at 0. And then once we start the gathering, I'll then move over and mostly mix on the DCAs, because that allows me to know, okay, at any point, if I go back to 0 on all of these, that's a good starting point, because that's the starting point I set during the rehearsal. So now if it's in between songs and maybe I boosted the electric a few decibels because it had a solo or a part that stood out for that, or I wanted a little less bass because it's a quieter song, I know that as we transition to a new song, I can get all these kind of coming back towards 0, and that's going to get me to a good starting point for the next song. And then during those quieter moments, let's say it's at the end of a message and maybe we're transitioning back into worship for a response song, I can start all of my DCAs at -5 or -7 to kind of let the band start coming in more naturally before it just is too abrupt coming out of a softer moment of the message.
That's a great tip. I've never thought of that. I mix on DCAs consistently, and I've never thought about the rehearsal, mixing on the inputs, and then keeping all your DCAs at unity. Gosh, what a great idea. And then you can always return. Man, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
I'm totally going to steal that.
You should. I'm sure I learned it from someone else. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to paint a picture for you. I'm a student, or I'm just learning this world, and I want to practice, but I don't have access to a room, but I do have access to a computer. Is there any value in practicing on a computer in a DAW like Pro Tools or Logic or GarageBand or Reaper, and if so, what would you say about this?
Yes, this is a great question. My learning was probably fairly linear like this. And then once I figured out how to use a DAW, so I was using Reaper and I got all the multi-tracks, which I'll explain in a second, my learning took a upward turn. And suddenly I was able to practice not just on Sunday mornings in the 45 minutes with a band as I'm trying to do a bunch of other things. I was able to practice on this random flight for 2 hours with my headphones. And so I learned so much more and could experiment way more and take the things I was learning. And so basically what each of those programs is a DAW, so basically digital audio workspace, and it allows you to you can record the multi-tracks or find them from a friend or someone else, which is basically each input, so every input in a band, and you can bring them into that software, and there's tutorials online and stuff like that for exactly how to do that. And then on your computer, you basically have an entire mixer, and now you can play with EQ, you can play with the gates, you can play with compressors, all the different settings, and you don't have anyone waiting on you. You just loop the band over and over, and you don't have to say, wait, can I get just the drummer for 20 more minutes because I really am trying to figure out how I like my kick to sound. Now you can play with it over and over and say, what happens if I take this EQ band and boost it by 10 decibels? Whoa, that's crazy. That doesn't sound good, or that does. And you can try, if I set the compressor with these settings, what does that look like? And you can really just play around with no cost to it. Mm-hmm. And then you can build your mix. And so that just helped me a ton. And I used Reaper, which is free. And I used multi-tracks that I recorded off of a console. Most digital consoles allow you to do that. And another way that this could look is if you have access to the same space, you can play back those tracks from your computer into the console, and it'll come in as if you have the band on stage. So your kick mic goes into the kick channel on your console, mm-hmm. snare mic goes in the snare mic on the channel, and all of the channels are coming in where they're assigned. So it's literally like you have the band on stage practicing for hours on end as long as you need it. So you can either do that with your console in your space, or you can do it on your computer anywhere in the world. And it's an awesome way to practice and just experiment and try the things that you're learning or you saw online or you learned in these videos and put them into practice.
Yeah, that's really good.
And one example of this, there's a ministry that I serve with on a college campus, and there were several students that wanted to learn how to grow in mixing. So they recorded, it's a student band, and so they recorded the multi-tracks from one of the gatherings and then sent it out to all 8 of these college students, and each of them mixed one song and had to go through the hours of mixing every little channel, refining it, making it sound good, putting it all together, using whatever settings they wanted, whatever software, and then they submitted it to me actually to see,
So you
to rank.
You were the judge.
Yeah, I was the judge. They asked me to be the judge.
They asked you to rank them.
Yes, and so I had to rank them. And what was fascinating though is some of them, they had completely different experience levels. Some of them were like, I don't even know how to start. Some of them had quite a bit of experience and were using pretty advanced software, pitch correction, waves plugins, side chaining, kick and bass, all these things. And what's fascinating, and this kind of goes back to the importance of balancing a mix and how important that is. The one that won the best mix out of all 8 of those was a guy that was using GarageBand and had almost no experience mixing.
That's amazing.
But he had the musicianship and he had listened to enough mixes to know here's kind of how I want to balance stuff. And he was using GarageBand, the free program on any Mac. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, I'm just going to do a basic little EQ on here because I think it sounds okay already. And he was able to balance all these inputs together without anything doing anything fancy. Mm-hmm. And the way that it came out sounded better than all the other ones who were maybe trying to go too deep into the weeds and didn't focus enough on, how does it all sound together? Yeah. How do I balance all the faders and the sound so that it sounds like a polished mix overall, not just making the kick sound perfect in correlation to the bass, but how does it all sound together?
Yeah. I think this is a good segue into capturing mic technique, those kinds of things, because it sounds like that student was able to execute a great mix in a simple way, probably because what was recorded was pretty good. And as I've been at other churches, I have experienced similar things where I walk in and I'm like, man, I do audio for a living and I'm stepping up to this console and I have no idea what's happening because of how intricate it is. And a lot of these layers upon layers of settings have hurt them because one thing gets out of whack and then other things get out of whack. All these things don't add up to something better. They actually end up subtracting. So in order to make a simpler scene or mixing, really mixing solution for a volunteer or anyone who's stepping up to a console, it's helpful to capture really good sources. Mm-hmm. Let's start with vocals. What are your recommendations on how to capture a great vocal in a live room, in a room?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot that you can do with the mic placement and the mic technique that is going to help ensure that everything else down in the chain, you can't undo the things that start at the beginning with the microphone. And so fixing that first and focusing, putting a lot more energy in that than we tend to is really helpful. With a vocal specifically, I think mic technique. So if you're holding the microphone, making sure that they're not holding towards the windscreen, so the circular part at the top. If you start cupping that, you start cupping it. It's actually, you might be able to hear on this. It's probably going to make it sound a little wonky. And so the technique of holding the microphone towards the bottom can be really helpful. And then just where your vocals are placed on the stage. So maybe if you have the ability, keeping them a little bit further, maybe from the drums and the cymbals, having them behind the speakers, all these things will help you capture a cleaner source.
Yeah.
With a snare, for example, if you're like, hey, or toms on the drums, if you're like, hey, it's resonating at a weird frequency, try adjusting the mic placement a little bit, maybe shifting it up before you go in and try and get everything out in the EQ. Typically, that's one of the areas, the drums, I'll go, no matter what the situation is, I'll go get my eyes on all of the drum mics every time because even a small adjustment can make it sound very different. And then I just know as I'm starting to sound check the drums, if I hear something a little bit off and I feel like I'm doing more than I should, or I'm like, there's something really resonating that doesn't feel right, I'll pause. It can feel a little weird, but I'll say, hey, drummer, can you just sit tight for a second? I'm going to come up there and just take a look at what's happening with the mics. And then you might see, oh, this mic fell over, or this one is pointed at the wrong thing, or this one's pointed way too close to the head and so it's resonating too much, or the kick mic that's inside the kick drum is maybe too close to the beater. If I just pull it back in the kick drum a little bit, it's going to have less of that attack rather than me trying to imperfectly EQ out exactly what that sound is, that is changing over time and all these other things. I can just adjust the mic placement and then the pickup of the sound is cleaner. Yeah. One other good example is if you're miking amps, rather than, let's say you have a SM57 on a little short stand, miking an electric amp. If it's too bright, start moving the microphone towards the outside and away from the center of the circle of the speaker, and it's going to get less bright. So rather than grabbing the EQ and chopping it up and doing a bunch of stuff, just start by moving the mic out a little bit and saying, oh, okay, that's a little bit darker. That's actually what I needed. And you can do little things like that to help the mix before you even get into all the processing and EQ and things like that.
Yeah, I love what you said about vocals. It's not just the microphone technique. It is the microphone technique of the person holding the mic, but it's also where is the microphone on the stage. If you're getting too much drums, move them away from drums. If they're in a spot that's prone to feedback, pull them back or set them to the side. Church that I used to mix at all the time, there was this weird thing that happened only on one spot of the stage, which is center of the stage, right where the worship leader would typically stand. That spot did not sound great. Everywhere else sounded pretty good. And so knowing that was helpful for me, because if it was, a Sunday with 3 vocalists and there had to be someone in the middle, then let's do that. And usually the primary worship leader would be there, but I had learned how to work around it. But if I ever got to stick him to the sides to move anybody out of that position, it actually was a great benefit for me. Drum mic placement, getting a good source. There's so much information there to figure out. But one tip that I would say as a drummer and an audio engineer is, I think there's this tendency, or this, I definitely felt this as I was learning to mic drums, which was, man, I'm getting all this bleed from other things, so I must get the microphone super close, as close to the drum head as possible. And I'd heard about this thing called proximity effect with a microphone, where if you get a microphone closer to the source, you'll get more and more pronounced low end. And I was like, okay, I want less other things and I want more low end on a drum. I should do that. What I found, though, is as I got microphones closer and closer to the drums, I ended up really messing up the frequency response that ended up translating into more bleed in very weird ways. So what I would really recommend for when miking, especially your toms and your snare drum with close mics, is to put your fist on the drum and then have the microphone touch the top of your fist. And that 4 inches is plenty to make the drum feel natural and have tons of low end response. And
fist in the center of the drum.
You put your fist, maybe not in the center, just what I would do is put my fist on the edge of the drum and then place the mic where it would go and then point that mic to the center of the drum. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's not, so the mic isn't super close to the drum head. It's kind of perked up above it, facing kind of down towards the center of the drum.
Yeah. And I've found with recording hundreds of songs and drums all the time that really produces the best drum to bleed ratio, drum to cymbals ratio, and the drum still sounding really good. Yeah, I think that's my one tip is if you could put your fist, point the mic, it actually really helps a lot, and has helped for me. Something that I think can also be enticing for beginning audio engineers is placing multiple kick drum mics on a kick drum. And I have found unless you really know what you're doing, it can actually cause more harm than help. And so I'm a huge fan of just putting one kick drum mic on a kick drum and making it sound awesome.
I agree. And I get a little bit of flack every once in a while.
Really?
But I agree, because my philosophy is if I can get everything I need from one mic, then I don't need 2 mics. Yep. So if you don't know what the mic is doing, I'm not going to put it in there just because I feel like I should or because I've seen other people do it.
Right.
Of course, there are people who are using 2 kick mics to get 2 different things. They're in a very controlled space. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
For me, if I'm walking in somewhere or we're setting up a band for the first time in a space and we're tearing down, I don't necessarily want all the complexity, because you have to remember too, as you add 2 mics to the same source, you're adding some polarity issues. So you just add another layer of difficulty. And so personally, I really like a kick mic inside of the kick, so usually a Beta 91A, and that's all I really need. I can get the attack I need, I can get the low end I need, I'm done, it sounds good. If there's an acoustic set or a kick drum that needs a little bit more of the body, I'll use a 52 or whatever on the outside to get that. But I really don't need both usually. And honestly, even if I show up at a church and they have both, I'll usually just mute one of them and usually end up just muting the outside one and then starting with the inside one, saying, let me just see what I can do with one kick mic. And then if I'm missing something, I'll add in the other one and add that for a specific purpose. But I don't feel the need to use multiple mics just because I feel like I should, unless there's something I'm specifically desiring.
I'm so glad we're on the same page with that. I agree. Sometimes I get some flack. Okay, so we've now hit a few different things. Let's pivot to some handheld microphone land things.
Great.
So specifically, let's talk about wireless mics. I'm a church. Maybe I'm a beginning church plant, or I'm starting up. At what point should I start implementing wireless mics? And generally, are they a good idea? I have some hot takes about this. I'm excited to hear what you think.
Oh gosh, I think your takes might be hotter than mine on this. My only thought with wireless mics is I think do a little bit of research to understand how they work. It's at its base, it is a transmitter, which is the mic, and then it's going to a receiver. So the like very practical but helpful tips are make sure the transmitter can see the receiver. And then so if you're having issues with it dropping out or noise or anything like that, start there. And then also one thing that affects me a lot in my world is helping with mic technique. So if someone's holding a handheld mic, if they cup the bottom, the antennas are always at the bottom. And so if you hold your hands around the antenna, a lot of times it doesn't even matter how close the receiving antenna is, so the other side of the antenna. If the microphone side, if you're cupping over the antenna, it's going to make it really hard for the signal to make it out of the microphone to the other antenna. So simple things like that can help you. If you're having dropouts, you're like, I don't understand, pay close attention. It might be when their bodies are in between the antenna and the other antenna, or they might be cupping the bottom. Sometimes that's kind of like a habit, is to like hold the very bottom of the handheld microphone. And so I usually ask that they hold it in the middle. We don't want them cupping the microphone side at the top, but we also don't want them just holding the bottom where they're blocking the antenna. So that's like a simple thing that I've found to be very helpful.
That's really good. I think I've experienced multiple churches getting too many wireless microphones too quickly. And if you're...
Are you talking about vocals or like for hosting?
Anything.
Or for everything?
I think it's like suddenly we have 4 frontline singers, and we have 2 people who host, and we have the pastor's mic, and we're a church of 350 people, and suddenly your volunteer is managing 7 wireless microphones. And wireless microphones are hard to troubleshoot. They're significantly harder to troubleshoot than a wired microphone, and a lot more prone to problems than just a microphone that's plugged in. So
that's a very good point. I haven't thought about that much. And also you add the layer of obviously cost. You also add the layer of cost of batteries. And even if you're using rechargeable, now there's a cost in terms of time to, okay, who's responsible for replacing all these batteries every single Sunday morning? Oh, I forgot to replace it, so now it's dead. Like there's all those layers to it as well. And if you're doing wireless vocal mics, then that doesn't really make much sense unless you also have wireless in-ears or, and so then now you're also talking about more batteries and more expense. So there is and I completely agree. Like there are people who specialize in RF and that is their whole thing. That's and it's not me, and I'm still learning, and there'll be moments where I'm like, oh, I didn't know that that's how that worked. Okay, cool. Like it can be a complicated environment. So if it's not working well for you, you may think about what things should we keep as wired, and what are the required things to have wireless, like maybe a pastor's mic where it helps a lot. But there's some things where it's like, if we don't need it, it may not be worth going that direction.
I think there's sometimes a general misconception that a wireless mic will sound better because it seems like it's a more expensive product. And there is actually no measurable case where a wireless microphone, when compared to a wired microphone, has ever sounded better. You lose, especially if you're not purchasing the top of the line. And what I mean by that, I mean you're looking at between $6,000 and $10,000 per channel. Like you buy one microphone and that whole thing costs $10,000 for that to work. If you're not buying in that price point, your $300 wireless Shure microphone is going to sound worse than just plugging in an SM58. And then you're also adding all these technical things on top. I'm just like, man, unless there's a really great reason, as few wireless microphones as possible.
Yeah, that's valid. Unless you have the capacity experience or someone that really wants to dig in and learn all that stuff. It's just, you just have to see it as another layer. Kind of like, oh, should we get an LED wall? It's like, well, maybe, but that's a whole nother thing. So I think we should put it in that category of like, you may be open to that, but we should hold it with some weight.
For sure. Okay. Effects on microphones, specifically vocal microphones. I think something that's hard about some of the audio volunteer mix position could specifically be that worship leader person, where this is really the only person probably in the congregation. It could be maybe, or any of those vocalists where they are singing at the top of their lungs into a microphone and then reading the Bible. How do you treat those two experiences into one microphone?
Yes. There's two different ways you could do this. One is more simple and one will be helpful for some, but maybe not for everyone. One, I always keep a fader, and it may be a DCA that has the vocal effects. So that way I can easily pull it down and say, okay, let me take that out. This pastor or worship leader is going to do its teaching moment. And of course, it's helpful if they communicate that they're going to do that in advance. So then I can have it written down and be ready to pull down that fader before they start speaking in a normal volume. The other thing that I do, this one's like a little bit more advanced or technical, is I'll have it so that DCA fader, or have like a mute group or something that mutes the effects. But what I'm muting is the bus, like the vocal bus that is going to the effect, or the send. I'm muting the send rather than the effect receive. And what that does is that whenever I want to mute the vocal effects, it lets whatever's already been sent to that effect tail off naturally, rather than that hard cut that we probably have all heard, where it's like, oh, I didn't know this person was going to start talking. Now they start talking and you're hearing kind of reverb, and then all of a sudden you just hear poof, and it just like cuts like a hard line. You're like, oh, okay, obviously they didn't catch that. But if you mute the send, or you mute that bus that is feeding that vocal effect instead, it just mutes so that nothing else goes to that effect, but everything that's already there and you're already hearing some of that vocal effect, it just tails off with your reverb rather than kind of like a hard line at the end.
Yeah.
So I find that makes it way more natural. So even if I miss it and they say a couple words, I just hit it real quick and mute it, and it just kind of tails off naturally, so it doesn't feel as much of an abrupt. Of course, the other way, you could just bring it down yourself with a fader slowly.
Yeah. That's a really good tip. I remember learning that and being like, oh, wow, this is better. This is better.
Yeah, it sounds way better. Once you try, you're like, oh gosh, this is so much easier.
This is so much better. Okay. We've hit a lot of really good things. There's another hot take moment for here and me, which is mixing in your room. Should you mix in stereo or mono?
When you said this, I was like, I don't even know what you're asking, so I'm going to let you describe. This is your take, so you go in, and then I'll add some color to it if I feel like it.
I think stereo is better. I agree. When I say stereo or mono, I mean, are you able to pan an input to the left side of the room and then the right side of the room? Some dispersion like that I think is helpful, but sometimes, since the majority of your room is only experiencing audio through one of those speakers, it might be best for you to mix in mono. If you pan electric guitar for instance, to one side, and then piano to the other side, in a mix for your headphones, that actually might be really pleasant. But what's really happening is half the room gets electric guitar and the other half of the room gets piano. And then you're like, that's weird. So unless your room is really excellently integrated, where the stereo field is pretty perceptible in most of the room, I might consider mixing less in stereo and mixing more in mono. Asterisks. What I'm not saying is, if a band member is providing you a stereo input, like a keys player, electric guitar player, I'm not asking the electric guitar player or the piano player to say, send me a mono signal, because playing a keyboard in mono is hard. I have friends who are like, that's the worst experience ever. So band's ears experience can still totally be stereo. Like, that's that happening. But sometimes I'm like, hey, maybe we should consider our experience to be more mono in the house. How does that hit you?
I would agree. I would agree with that. In most environments, like I'd say like 95%, only like 10, 15, 20% of the room in the very center is hearing any type of stereo, is hearing the left and the right speaker at the same time. Mm-hmm. And usually that's where front of house is. Yep. So it's easy to say like, oh yeah, let me mix for it. Like, oh, this sounds great when I pan my toms 30 this way, 30 this way. I pan, one acoustic this way, one acoustic this way. Vocals, I'm going to go 10 here, 10 here. Like, just make this thing sound incredible, like a record. But you have to remember, in any record, you're listening with headphones and you have 180 degrees of pan, and you also have the full volume. So there's way more places to put stuff. Whereas in a live environment, you really just have volume. For most people, they're definitely not closed off into 180 degrees of placement, but they're likely not even going to have that. And so for most, I just keep it on the forefront of my mind. If I pan the tom 10 to the left, it's going to be a little bit louder for the people on the left and a little bit quieter for the people on the right. Now that's a place that I am panning because I'm good with that. I think that that's a valuable. I'm not too worried about a 5% increase in tom volume on one side and a 5% decrease on one side. And I think it helps with the stereo image a little bit in a lot of environments. But if I were to do that with an acoustic, if let's say I had only one acoustic and I pan it 10 to the left, I need to remember the mix is now going to sound different in different spots. So someone may say, oh, there was a lot of acoustic today. And I'm like, well, where'd you sit? Oh, I sat on the left. Well, the people on the right were thinking there wasn't enough acoustic.
Right.
So it's just, and that's a scary place to be. So most often I want to hear what everyone is hearing. And so I'm going to be very careful of what I pan left and right.
I'm glad that you didn't think it was as hot of a take as it is.
I think you dumbed it down a little bit for this. You came in a little fiery last time.
I did come in a little fiery. Okay, headset mic. That's the one mic that we hear the most in the whole service. I think that's true. I mean, you might hear the worship leader, but they're probably only singing half of the songs. But that headset mic, whoever's teaching, you're going to listen to uninterrupted for anywhere from 20 to 50 minutes. What are some helpful techniques for a volunteer miking up someone or the pastor who's putting on their headset mic for that headset mic to sound good in the room?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say invest in the headset mic. And that can be monetarily, that can be with time, that can be with effort. It's easy to just kind of write it off and say, oh, that doesn't matter much because it's pretty similar week to week, or it's just a really hard situation. But we spend money in a lot of different ways to try and improve different things. And I think the headset mic is somewhere where you probably want to look at getting a pretty decent headset mic. There's one that I use a lot. It's a DPA headset mic. They tend to be pretty reliable. And yes, there's a little bit of a cost to it. And so for some, it's not the right fit. And there's other mics that work great, like Thor mics and other ones that are less expensive. But I would say do a little bit of research, maybe try a couple of them in your space and then return them if they don't work. Do some research there, and then also invest the time to EQ it. Say maybe if you got a new microphone, ask someone to speak on it for 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe they just read through a poem or something while you're kind of dialing it in, figuring out what sounds good. Let them walk around a little bit, but then also invest in it in the sense of that's a mic that I always check. And so every week I'm going to have that person who's going to be using it stand on stage for a couple minutes because I want to hear it and I want to just make sure it's going to be live for 30, 40, 50 minutes, however long it is. And so it's really important. And I don't want the first time that I hear it to be during the service with everyone there where I can't go up and make any adjustments. And so it's the combo of I want to hear it on stage, but I also want to get my eyes on it and see where it's placed. And so tip for most headset mics, you want the mic to be placed kind of here at the corner of their smile, not touching their face, not touching their beard, because that can make some noises, but just kind of at the corner of their smile. And so you don't want it out here because if it's too far forward, you're going to get their breathing noises as they use their breath and they breathe out of the side of their mouth. And so you'll hear that kind of like happening. And if it's too far back, you may not get enough of the voices you want. And so you kind of want it here at the corner of the smile. And so there's a lot that you can do if you're having some issues with either popping or like some S's or things like that. Try sliding the microphone back a little bit and see if that helps. So don't be afraid to experiment a little bit, but overall invest your time, your energy, and a little bit of resource into that headset mic because it is really important.
Yeah. I love your tip of the first time hearing the mic shouldn't be during the sermon. Because I've been in that situation where that was the normal and you hear it for the first time during the sermon. You're like, okay, I guess that's what it is. I'm not going to touch it. So yeah, that's great. Okay. I want to do kind of some quick rapid fire things. First are microphones. I'm going to buy some microphones for my actually, let's not do drums. Drums are a little more intense. Let's start with vocals. I'm going to buy a microphone for my vocalist. What do I buy?
Most often for a vocal mic, I'm going to use an SM58 from Shure or a Beta 58 from Shure. And they're very similar. The Beta 58 has a slightly tighter pickup pattern. They sound pretty similar. Here's why. One, they're not super expensive and 2, they work on every vocal. And that's the thing. If you're in the same space for a long time, you want to try out some different mics, you have a little bit of budget, maybe you want to try a nicer one, that's great. I have a Neumann KMS 104 that I bring with me because I just own it and I like it. It sounds awesome. It's kind of similar to the 58 in that it sounds really good on everyone.
Yep.
It's a little bit more expensive, but a lot of mics though, as you start to pick and choose, will only sound good on certain vocals. So then you're going to kind of get into the game of, well, this vocalist is in this spot, so let me shuffle it over, and then that mic actually made it worse, and we can get into, so like for instance, like a Shure Beta 87 is going to be pretty bright. So if you get a vocal that's already bright, you're going to have a lot of issues with that. And you'll probably be thinking, I wish I had just gone with a 58 because now I'm trying to undo all the stuff that this microphone is adding. And so I personally, if I don't have a ton of time to try it out and I don't have a ton of budget, I'm going to go with a 58, just straightforward, because I know it's going to work well, and it may not blow the roof off the place, but it also is definitely not going to give me any issues, and I'm going to be able to do everything I want to do with a 58.
Okay. DIs. Does a DI matter? Like, if I have 2 DIs in front of me and I have I could choose one from Amazon that has all the switches and buttons and it's $40, or I could choose the RNDI by Neve for $500. Is that a place where you're going to spend your money?
This is a good question. In my context and my personal preference, no. But I will say I only buy DIs from like Radial or like the Pro DI 2, which I think is from.
I think that's also Radial.
Is Radial? Okay.
I think it is.
IMP, I think, or
IMP is Whirlwind.
Whirlwind. Okay.
Yeah, that's
the other one. Yeah, I like that little blue one.
Yeah, the blue one.
I like that one.
Blue one. Yeah, I love those DIs.
Okay, so like the little blue one, like the Whirlwind IMP Blue DI, or the Pro DIs, which are like they've got a few different models. Any of those to me are pretty similar, and again, this is within the context of live and in rooms that are not like your sound system's probably not going to reproduce the minor changes within a certain DI, in my experience at least. So I don't put a ton of value in that. Now I'm also not probably going to get one on like Alibaba that's $8. So I'm gonna, within the context of those 2 brands, I'm sure that anything from there is going to serve you well.
Cool. Okay, rapid fire. You get one answer. Inexpensive but quality drum mics. We're going to go in order. Ready? Kick drum.
Beta 91A.
Snare top.
SM57.
Snare bottom.
Usually an SM57 too.
Awesome. Toms.
I like the Sennheiser E604, like the little ones.
The clip one.
I like them. I also like it because they clip and they're small. So I'm like,
yes,
it sounds good, but it also is very easy to just slap on there and then move on.
I think those are the best clips made for drum clips ever.
It's a good question. Yeah, why don't people just copy that clip? It's not that hard.
That clip is
why
the
are
best.
Clips so hard?
The Audix clips are so bad. Sorry, Audix. Okay.
I do also like I do also like the Audix mics in terms of drum mics. So I'm happy with those as well.
Overheads?
I'm not super specific, to be honest.
Just some things. Does it even have to be a condenser, or can it be anything?
Condenser, yeah. So like a Shure.
I don't know. It's just a small diaphragm pencil condenser.
Yeah. I think like SM81 or like one of those type.
SM81s. I think Rode makes the NT5.
Those are great.
I think people like those. Yes. Is it those same mics for hi-hat for you as well?
Yeah, but I also am okay with like a SM57 or something a little bit tighter, only because I don't use an infinite amount of hi-hat. There's a lot of hi-hat that gets into the overheads. So I'm not typically, personally at least, the hi-hat mic is a lot of times helping the in-ears for the band, and I'm using it a little bit. And if I'm in a big room or a big outside event, then yes, I'm using the hi-hat mic. But most of the time, I may want it to be a little bit tighter so that it's not picking up everything that all the other mics are picking up on the drum kit as well.
Okay, awesome. All right, we've done our rapid fire. Here's the final big question.
Let's go.
Troubleshooting. This is the way we're going to end this whole conversation, is troubleshooting. Something's not working on stage. Let's say it's the keyboard. Where do you start?
Oh my gosh, this is so important because we all have that experience. Like, this is every time there's an experience. Something is going wrong. Like it's all. So I would say, because there's always going to be something that's a little bit off, the first thing is like, what's your heart posture? Like, how are you first approaching it, and just making sure, doing the like maybe mentally putting yourself in that situation of, how am I going to respond? Because there are people that when something goes wrong, they immediately go, it's your fault. And that happens from people in my seat, like at the front of house console, saying, "Nope, it's the keyboardist's fault. Your keyboard sucks," or it's the keyboardist sitting there going, "Nope, sound guy sucks. I'm sending it. This was here's the best one. It's always this was working yesterday. It's always like
or last week.
Because it worked at a. It's like that's not relevant, guys. Please don't bring that up. That doesn't have anything to do with the current issue. We're all on the same team. So and to be honest, most of the time the person who says that ends up being the one who it's their fault, and you're like, hey, it was working on mine. I didn't say anything, but it was, and so you don't want to be the person jumping in with both feet going, it's definitely not my fault, because half the time it is my fault, half the time it's their fault. And so first, heart posture of let's work on this together. Hey, thanks for letting me know that the keyboard's not working, or I'm not seeing it. Can we make sure that it's plugged in right? Once you get past that initial, is everything starting? Like you kind of do that initial check of, is it passed right? Are there like little checks like that? Do they actually have the cable plugged in? Then, and this is like the big overarching thing that I think is really helpful, is start with the smallest things that could be wrong. A lot of our tendencies is to say, oh, I'm not seeing the key sound. I bet the snake is broken, or I bet the audio console is broken, or I bet the keyboard is broken. And it's like, well, that's actually not very likely. Usually the smallest issues that would be easiest to fix are the most likely to be the problem. And even the DI that cost a few $100s, that's probably not the issue. It could be though. Most often it's a cable that doesn't work or something like that. So I always start with the easiest things to replace and show that it works. So think about, could we replace one of these things? And before we even get to that, it's really helpful to isolate where in the signal chain the problem is. So if I can easily take the XLRs out of the keys DI box and plug them into maybe the acoustic box or something else and show, okay, when I plug that into the acoustics DI, I do see it. So now I know from this XLR on, everything is working on the console. So I've now just cut off half of the variables, and I can say the issue has to be from this XLR up to the keyboard, and you can work backwards that way. And you can make that point at any point in the chain really, but it's easiest. Or you plug the 1/4 inch that's plugged into the keyboard into the DI for the acoustic, look at it on the console and say, oh, now I'm seeing it. So now I know that the DI is working and the 1/4 inch is working, so it's got to be the keyboard. And they're like, oh shoot, I didn't have it unmuted on the keyboard, something like that. So you can really dial it in. And so staying calm, just taking it one thing at a time. And I may start, if it's like kind of cutting in and out, I may say, oh, let me just try replacing that XLR. That'll take me 1 minute. I have an extra one ready. Plug that in. Oh, that fixed it. Oh, it didn't. It's just easy to rule out those things rather than the tendency to say, wait, where's our backup keyboard? This one is completely broken. It's like, well, that's probably not very likely. So start with like the very small things and then just work together, and you're usually able to find the problem pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's so good. I love the heart posture thing, just being like, oh man, something's not working. And I actually don't even like the word fault. I think it's like, it's somebody's fault. We're both trying to get this thing to work. Something's wrong. It could be the master volume on the keyboard's down, or it could be something's poorly patched. The first two questions I always ask myself are, is the thing plugged in? And is it turned on? And are both things turned on? So is my console, okay, that's working. Okay, is the keyboard turned on? Okay, great. Are they plugged into each other? Oh, wait, they're not plugged in. Let's just do that, and then that'll fix the problem. But yeah, I love like finding the specific source and then working backwards is great. Jacob, thank you a ton for being here with me today and this week, getting to learn from you. I learned a lot. I hope you had a great time. If anyone wanted to reach out to you specifically, where would they reach out?
Probably the easiest place is just on social media, Instagram or Facebook, just my name, Jacob Lackey. Okay. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
no, this has been awesome though. I've really enjoyed it. You're awesome. It's just been fun to see all the synergies between us and getting to teach and learn together.
Yeah. Thanks. I hope tuning into this was a blessing to you and to your church. If you have any kind of audio conversations, any kind of thoughts, there's a chat bubble at the bottom of the screen on the worshipinitiative.com, and you can send any questions there. If you're listening to us on YouTube, then I would encourage you to jump over to the worshipinitiative.com and check out our platform. I hope this was a blessing to you and your church.